Alright, so Widowmaker's job in Double Sniper Rein Zarya versus Double Sniper Rein Zarya is to control area. And you control area by taking certain sight lines away from your opponents. So rolling out on King's Row attack. This is a pretty good spot because it doesn't allow the enemy to set up over there if they start over there, unless they win the 1v1, which is possible, but it's a favorable risk for you because the amount of risk you're taking if you go for a duel at the very beginning of the match is lower for you as the attacker because your spawn is closer. So if you feel like taking a duel right here, you can potentially, or you could just tell your team where their Widow or Hanzo is at and then have your team help you with them. But most importantly, the reason this position is good is because you have this cover here that you can always duck behind if anyone does try to peek out and duel you, if you don't happen to shoot them for some reason. But more importantly, it protects you from the back window and hotel. So you are free to shoot here without worrying about anyone who's over there behind hotel or in the window. So it just makes it gives you less things to worry about, so you can focus on just controlling this area and hitting your shots in this area. And the reason this area is important is because if your Hanzo rolls out and goes across high ground to get to the back window so they can set up a really huge crossfire for your team, then you can assist him and anyone who tries to engage him over there or potentially over here. But that's a starting spot, and then once your team rotates around, you can rotate here with your team. And if you stand behind your Rein, then you don't have to worry about the enemy Widowmaker in theory. If you stand close enough to your Rein, you're on higher ground, so she'd have to grapple much higher, which there's a skybox. So at some point she can't get above your Rein shield when you're on high ground, if you're standing close to him. And if your Rein just stands with you and protects you, then you don't have to worry about the Widow, which means you can focus on controlling sightlines, which is your main job as Widowmaker in, or controlling, not sightlines necessarily, but area. So if you don't have to worry about the enemy Widowmaker, then you can just focus on having all of these sightlines that you have. You can shoot all the way over there, you can shoot the window, you can shoot down this hallway, you can shoot anyone who tries to go up through there, and you can shoot anyone who's all the way back in the archway. So you control potentially a lot of space with this spot on Widowmaker, which is controlling space and area is one of the key things you want to do on Widowmaker. And your main objective is not to duel the enemy Widowmaker and try to outskill her in some way with a hookshot or whatever. Your main objective is simply to control sightlines in area and punish anyone who tries to not respect you for having these sightlines. If your team rotates to point, you can rotate down here behind your Rein shield and on this corner. It gives you less favorable sightlines, but it gives you more cover than up there, obviously. You can also rotate up to up here. Which gives you not great sightlines either. You can shoot this window is the only main difference. You have more cover though, and you can also shoot down this hallway. And you can always back up here rather than being caught right here, where if they push your team you have to back up into here, which isn't as safe as backing up into the stairwell, because if you back up into the stairwell, anyone on the ground can't get you, but if you do back up into here, then anyone can rotate through there because anyone can walk along the ground. So yeah, your main job as Widowmaker is just to make sure nobody can go anywhere that's not behind a shield, and get away with it. Next up, Hanzo's job.
Comes honor. With honor,
You can scout
redemption.
potentially for anyone who tries to set up and up there potentially, or you can scout where their Widowmaker is so that your Widow knows whether they have to worry about a potential duel at the very beginning or not. And then you generally just want to go with your team, and your team can escort you so you can get over here. By going up here, it's a lot easier for you to move over to this area with the cover of the trees. It'll be hard for the enemies to notice that you're moving over here because these 3 trees block a lot of sight lines for them. They still can potentially punish you as you're jumping right there, but your jump is pretty quick, so it'll be hard for them to react usually. And then you can always retreat to the Mega if you get shot on your way over, and you're at like half health. And your healers have to prioritize healing other people, but generally your healer should be prioritizing healing you when you're rotating. Just like when a flanker like Genji or Tracer is setting up on a flank, if a Zen can orb them, then the priority should be on orbing them, because your monkey shouldn't really be taking damage when you're in the setup phase of a dive. Just like your Rein shouldn't necessarily be taking a whole bunch of damage when you're setting up crossfire. So in that way, so yeah, if you get pushed by a Hanzo here, you should have a slight advantage in that you can place your Sonic before him, and I don't think Sonic reaches very well through this wall. If you hug the right side of the wall, it'll be difficult for him to get the Sonic advantage on you, and you can generally spot him with the Sonic yourself. And you can potentially be pocketed by your Mercy. It's kind of risky, but your Mercy can also hug this right wall, just like you'll want to do generally. If you hug the right wall, it's generally more difficult for them to see you as you jump over there, if you don't jump up for no reason while climbing, rather than on the left side, because the left side you have less of this edge, like this whole edge. If you stand back here, just like if you back up on high ground, it removes you from view. Well, if you're back further on the high ground from the edge, as you're jumping across, this will give you slightly less view of your body. Still slightly dangerous, but generally a risk worth taking. So you'll take a small risk there, and then you can either be bubbled here, probably, if your team sets up in the way I'm suggesting. If you take a 1v1 here, and then your main objective is to end up here, because here you can shoot anyone who tries to go to the point, and you are generally out of the sight lines of anyone who tries to set up behind the Rein shield, who will set up right there. Your team will have to inform you if you're going to get flanked from here, then you'll want to try and you can either back off if you don't think it's very favorable for you, or you can try and duel them. You can always do a rotation onto their tanks as someone's trying to go around behind with your team if your team is in position. But your main goal as Hanzo is to create the crossfires, and just don't let anyone position in a favorable position. You want to force the enemy into awkward positions. And yeah, your main goal is not to go for cheeky limbs there, but to just focus on not taking damage and create the crossfire. As for Reinhardt in this instance,
Justice will be done.
the reason I personally like to play Reinhardt here over Orisa or Winston is because although Winston gives you more options to do different things like pressure jumping and whatnot, the pressure that it puts on your snipers does not feel as worth to me, particularly on this point, because if they have a Reinhardt and your snipers don't have a Reinhardt, then they have to give up a lot of extra sight lines to the enemy, which makes it harder for your team to do things if your snipers have to give up a bunch of space. Because if your snipers give up a bunch of space, then the enemy team can do a whole bunch with that space, which makes it harder for your team to do things. So yeah, the reason you play Reinhardt over Orisa, in my opinion, is because Reinhardt's 2000 HP shield lasts longer than Orisa's 900 or 800 HP shield on attack, because you can't just have it placed down and then place another, like have the cooldown reset while you have your shield down on attack, whereas on defense you can have a shield set down and then the second shield will be off cooldown. But on attack you only get one shield of 900 or 800 HP or whatever, which is significantly less than a 2000 HP shield. It's basically 2000 extra HP points on all of your team behind you, which is massive. Like, you don't want to underestimate the value of shields. So yeah, in the Hanzo Storm Arrow meta, Reinhardt's shield is one of the shields that lasts the longest on attack. You can certainly play Winston here if you want to control areas more, but it becomes a little bit more complex to pull off. So we're just talking about Rein Zarya in this instance. So yeah, the reason you want to position Rein up here, even though he can't really do Rein hammer things, is because his shield lasts longer than anyone else, and the shield is very valuable because it lets your Widow do really insane things with the sightlines that she gets, because she can control so much space with the sightlines, more so than you could on any other tank. The amount of area that you would control as Reinhardt if you were being aggressive would be so small, because your shield wouldn't cover very much, and if you were Winston being aggressive, you do control a fair amount of space in some instances, but then you also leave a lot of space open in some instances. So anyways, enough about Winston. So yeah, Reinhardt's job is you want to shield your Widow generally, and just let your Widow control sight lines while your Hanzo is rotating, and then once your Hanzo is rotated, then you can drop, probably with your team behind you, or they can potentially stay up there near the back so that they can hide around the hallway if they need to, if anyone's trying to test them. And I'm not sure where the point starts, to be exact. I think it's at this lamppost, although maybe it's over here. But the main idea is why you would hold here is that you can touch a point and no one can pressure you particularly as Reinhardt, and if anyone does pressure you, you can always back off to this corner and you have this corner to hide behind. And if anyone does try to chase you any further than that, then you can back down this hallway and get a free charge. So yeah, generally you don't want to be taking duels as Reinhardt in this instance, because the amount of pressure that you add by taking duels is much less than the amount of space, than the amount of attention you force with your shield. Because the amount of attention you force with your shield is that everyone has to either focus your shield or your Widow gets free sightlines, whereas if you just push forward, then everyone can kind of ignore you and the enemy team can just kite you a bit. And they don't have to fight you right away, which as you're, so for instance, let's say you try and be aggressive on Reinhardt here. The problem with being aggressive on Reinhardt here is you have to probably step at least about here, maybe a little less, maybe about here. Let's say that Reinhardt has to touch point and you notice he touches point and you want to duel him because he's discorded and you think you can win the 1v1 with some help from your crossfire snipers. The only issue is that in the process of walking up here, your shield becomes a lot less valuable up in this area. Because if your Widow and Zen are parked down here potentially with you, or if they're then your shield is not doing anything for them. So the only added benefit is a little bit of extra pressure onto the tanks, which in double sniper Rein Zarya versus double sniper Rein Zarya, your main win condition is generally not to kill the Reinhardt, because the Reinhardt doesn't give them that much control, because your Widow and Hanzo can just play around the Reinhardt a whole bunch if they just play well, and set up on crossfires like that. So killing the Reinhardt is not the best win condition that you can have with this comp. Generally what's going to happen is your snipers will be fighting over space and over favorable positions to take crossfires from, and one of the snipers will get picked, and it'll either be resable or not, and you have a couple options. If your team is in position, let's say your Reinhardt is slightly a little forward because he can tell that your Hanzo or whoever is going to win the duel, then you can start pressuring the tanks. If the Mercy goes for the res, then if your team can follow up and kill the tanks while the Mercy can't heal them, that's a good way to continue. But it's also slightly risky, because then if you kill their Reinhardt in the process, you've probably mispositioned or made your positioning weaker for your team. Your team is positioned weaker, is what I mean to say, so that they have less map control. Whereas, like for instance, if your Hanzo was up in window and the Reinhardt was back here, and the Mercy reses the Hanzo from like right here, and the Hanzo can't risk peeking because the Zen will kill him with a right click if he tries to push the Mercy who's around the corner, resing Hanzo right there. But what your Hanzo can do is he can peek over here. Well, if the Reinhardt's back here enough, then your Hanzo can't really pressure him unless he jumps down, which he can do if your team is in position to help him and help him be aggressive with him. Then you can jump on, he can jump onto the Reinhardt, and the Reinhardt can't do anything about a Hanzo right in his face, because the Hanzo should just kill him, especially with the help of your team trying to focus him down. The only issue is, again, the Reinhardt isn't the Reinhardt doesn't control the most space and doesn't control the end of the fight as much as other characters can. Because if you, as I was describing earlier, one of the instances where the Mercy reses, you have that option to kill the Reinhardt. That's an option you can take, or you can try and kill the Mercy. If that's not possible and they just res, then you just play it like you have been, jockeying for good positioning to get crossfires, and playing off of your crossfires and putting a bunch of pressure on their team, building ults as you go along, and you can potentially use ults to win fights. Because you should charge your ults faster with better crossfires than the enemy team. If that doesn't happen, and let's say you kill them perhaps for a second time, or you kill them and the Mercy can't res, or the Mercy dies resing. Well, if the Mercy dies resing, then they lost the fight already. So let's just say the Mercy can't res. Then what you can do is your Reinhardt can be more aggressive. Much more aggressive, I would say, because since they have only one sniper in this instance, the amount of area the opponents can control with their snipers is significantly lessened. So your shield to control where your team can be is a lot less needed, since they only have one sniper that your team respects, and they can either play around that sniper's sightlines with cover, or they can crossfire the sniper potentially, etc, etc. But yeah, when there's only one of them, it makes cover all sorts of areas much safer for your team in general, and it puts a lot less pressure on you, because you can't simply be rotated on as you're being aggressively and then just get shot in the back by one of them and then get shot in the back by the other. So yeah, if you get a pick on one of the snipers, you can be a lot more aggressive as Reinhardt until your team can move in with you. and try and chase kills. Just make sure, yeah, you're playing around cover properly if you need to, if you start taking too much damage. But yeah, you should be able to just push right into them if they lose one of their snipers, because they're gonna have 0 map control, and your team can. That means your team is not under as much pressure. So for instance, say you pick the Hanzo, your Widow is under a lot less pressure. She only has to worry about the other Widow, so she can just devote her whole attention to the Widow duel, and she can be pocketed by your Mercy and Zen potentially, etc, etc. And you can, if she just, all she has to do, she doesn't necessarily even have to win the Widow duel, but she just makes the other Widow useless, and your team is up 1, they don't have their Hanzo, they're doing literally no damage to you guys, and your tanks can just run into them with Discord and kill their team with Reinhardt swings and Zarya stuff, and you know. So I think that's the main stuff I wanted to say concerning Reinhardt. You could potentially try setting up over here if you wanted a slightly better route of retreat that would allow you like, if you set up over here with your team, it gives your team worse sightlines obviously, but it gives your team a slightly better route of retreat. If they are all coming this way and none of them through hotel, and one of you gets picked, your team can just back up safely to spawn. Whereas if one of you gets picked over here and they push you guys and you're down 1, you're gonna likely lose the fight, since you're down 1, unless you somehow get a cheeky pin that kills one of them, which is one of the advantages of here. But this position is it's a risky position, but you kind of want to take risks on offense rather than taking a less risky one, because you need to make plays quickly on offense, so you don't want to just waste time attacking from a less favorable position and then hoping that something sticks being slightly aggressive. Rather, you want to be more aggressive, and if things go bad, then they can go bad, then you can just reset quickly rather than just wasting your time on a push that lasts forever but you never get anything done because your position, your map control is weak. Let's see. Oh yeah, concerning Orisa versus Rein, it may seem pointless to play Reinhardt on the high ground when Orisa could poke shield, but as I said, the extra effective HP on your teammates is so valuable that I think it's worth it to play Reinhardt on the high ground briefly there, and then your team can potentially rotate down and still play behind you to have the extra effective health of the shield when they play right here and you play right here. So yeah, I think that's all for Reinhardt. As for Zarya, another reason you can play Rein Zarya is if they do play like triple support Brigida. Rein Zarya are better at contesting the point, and if they try to push you, you guys will be able to survive longer than others. Except for Winston Diva, which you could go Winston Diva against Brig and one sniper versus triple sports Hanzo, and just avoid the Brig and force them into areas they don't really want to be in, because you'll have huge control over the high ground, which means their Hanzo can't control it, which means your snipers can go all over and just crossfire the Hanzo or whoever, which will be very difficult for them to deal with. But anyways, sorry. So yeah, you can go for some cheeky charge right here, but you generally want to follow your team up the stairs, in my opinion, because if you're up here, then you can bubble your Hanzo if their Hanzo tries to take a duel with him, because if their Zarya bubbles their Hanzo and your Hanzo doesn't get a bubble, then he's gonna lose. And you can always walk in front of Rein's shield and bubble and just get some free charge if they're trying to break your Rein's shield. And you can always assist by shooting at the Hanzo. You can also shoot over Rein's shield better here than you could on the ground. And shooting over Rein's shield is good for you because that gives you ult charge faster. Beyond that, you just want to stay with your Reinhardt mostly, and you can always, if they try and get cheeky and do dumb stuff like flanks and whatnot, then you can always help someone with a flanker with your bubble, etc, etc. But yeah, you generally want to stay with your Reinhardt, and you'll drop with your Reinhardt here once your Hanzo's in position, and then you can bubble the Hanzo, for instance, if he gets pushed again in that window. And or you can bubble your Rein, but generally you just want to try and you generally want to save your bubbles when you get to the low ground, because if they try to push you when you try to bubble to get energy, then you might be in trouble because you don't have bubble when they actually engage, and they can just charge your Rein for free or whatnot. Charge and pin. Let's see. But yeah, the main reason you play another reason you play Rein over other tanks is for the easy grab dragon combo for easy win. That's the main stuff on Zarya. Just do Zarya things. Help your teammates when they need help. Don't get too greedy with charge. Okay, then we got Zenyatta.
True self is without form.
So as I was saying earlier, when your team is rotating, you'll generally want to have your orb on the DPS, because they'll be the ones that will be doing the most solo stuff. So they'll be the ones that are most likely to take damage because they won't be with your Reinhardt, because your Widow could potentially be over there, and more importantly, your Hanzo will likely be trying to go this way. So you want to orb your Hanzo so that he can safely get through there. And if you're up here on high ground, your orb is less likely to fall off him. You have better sight lines that you can also help control, like the Widow, to shoot anyone who tries to stand far enough back. You can shoot over the Rein shield potentially. You can pressure anyone in the window with your Discord that gives you locations, so you can shoot them before they can peek, etc. As well as you can peek down here and help with the Hanzo duel if their Hanzo tries to push your Hanzo or whoever. If their snipers are dumb enough to try and stay here and here, then yeah, you guys have more control to help your Hanzo and your Widow. Your Widow has more control, and like I said earlier, the duel is in her favor in that if she takes a duel with someone who's positioned up here or here, since Widow attacking Widow's spawn is closer, taking more risks is better than on defense, because if you fuck up, then you're not that far from spawn, so the Widow can get back to the fray quickly to replay with your team. Oh, lovely.
Now entering King's Row.
So yeah, you generally want to orb your Hanzo as he's rotating, because just like a flanker like Genji or Tracer, as they were setting up for a dive, when you're setting up for a dive, it's best to orb your flankers, because they'll be the ones going on the most aggressive flanks generally. That as they're moving into those positions, they'll likely get pressured more than your Winston, who should focus on not taking damage when you're setting up a dive. Now when your Winston does dive, or your Reinhardt does go in, then you generally want to have your orb on him. But yeah, you just generally want to have your orb on people that it's going to help win a 1v1. Potentially. or if they're moving into position and they need the potential added security. So yeah, if you're up here instead of on the low ground, you can keep your orb on him easier because you won't lose line of sight as easily. And then you can orb your Mercy or anyone who's taking damage for whatever reason. But yeah, you generally just want to shoot people who aren't behind shields because that's free ult charge for you. And you control space by doing that, making them not want to go anywhere that's not behind the shield. Your Reinhardt can potentially back up with your team to here and recharge your shield here, but that's a long ways to go. But yeah, you'll generally want to drop down here with Reinhardt if he drops down here, because I think this is a pretty favorable position to pressure point from with Reinhardt, since he can charge people here. So Zarya will set up here. It's not the best sight lines, but you can always do cheeky flanks where you rotate quietly, no one can hear you. You can set up here. You're not very pressured by anyone up there or anyone up there potentially, or right above you, because they can't see you. So if the Reinhardt's standing about there, you can potentially shoot him or anyone that's behind him that's peeking this way. But you generally don't want to duel people. You can just catch a surprise someone and right click them from there. Hopefully get a pick, because this comp is all about picks. You can also set up here, although it's not as safe because you're not likely behind your Reinhardt shield. Your Reinhardt, I guess, can also rotate up here if he wants to push the snipers off of high ground, but that's gonna take way too long to set up. You don't generally want to waste that much time. Like, if your snipers haven't gotten a pick within like 15-20 seconds, then I would agree the Reinhardt can be a bit more aggressive on the Reinhardt potentially, but that's generally not how you want to play this comp, because it makes it harder for the rest of your team to do their jobs when your Reinhardt is being that aggressive in that position. It's not the best win condition, because the way the comp works is not built around Reinhardt doing eliminations. Okay, so yeah, those are some potential options. You can also potentially sneak all the way around if you want, but they have the very likely potential to see you through that one hallway I mentioned that looks over to this area. So you probably don't want to sneak all the way around behind Archway to second, because it's very risky if they see you on the way there. Yeah, those are the basic things you want to do, is then just help control sightlines with your Widow, because you can also do things that the snipers can do, like controlling areas, because they don't really want to peek a Zenyatta that can shoot them and do a bunch of damage to them. And so you just want to control where the opponents can be by controlling area, having area denial with your potential sightlines to shoot things that aren't behind shields. And Mercy, you generally just want to stay with your team and damage boost the Widow potentially, if the Widow stays with your team. You can also just have your Hanzo be with the team. If your Hanzo tries to go on a bunch of cheeky flanks and he's just getting deleted every time because he's getting outplayed, then he can play with the team a bit more here and just try and win the shield war. Or you can play more passive sightlines, so the team could push from here, which is a much more passive sightline than over here, and just try and win the tank war. Or you can try Hotel, where their Hanzo and Widow are going to have a tough time shooting your team, whereas your team can just kind of shoot on their tanks potentially while your tanks are fighting their tanks. The only issue is they're likely to get a bunch of cleave if they push you with their Reinhardt. But yeah, that's one option, is if your snipers are just getting shit on in the duels, then you can try and win the tank war instead and just avoid their sight lines as best you can. So yeah, as Mercy, you're in the instance I spoke of, you'll generally be pocketing your Widow a bit. You can pocket your Hanzo like I was saying before. The sight lines aren't that great from this area. If you GA over across here, the sight lines aren't super great to see you. They can potentially see you, but you'll be GAing quickly across this, and Mercy's hitbox gets kind of weird when she GAs. Slightly harder to hit, particularly from an angle like that. So yeah, you can potentially follow your Hanzo over here and pocket him a bit while he potentially fights over some positioning, but you generally just want to stay with your team. And you can potentially just pocket your Zen if your Widow stays over there and sets up a wider crossfire on these two areas. You can just pocket your Zen right here and let your Zen control this area that your Widow can't control, but your Widow controls this area better because your Widow can see all the way potentially back here to this doorway where, or over here where the Zenyatta can't see if they try and hide around here-ish. Because your Zen can only shoot down the hallway just because of the distance. Yeah, so yeah, that's how you'd play this against Rein Zarya. You generally just want to go for picks on the other snipers because that gives your team a bunch of space. You can, if their snipers are being pussies and just trying to hide behind their Rein shield because they don't want to take duels because they're on defense and they want to try and live as much, then yeah, your DPS should just be able to go in all sorts of areas to set up crossfires. And if you draw a bunch of cooldowns out of the tanks, then, like for instance, let's say their Reinhardt touches point and they use bubble so he can touch point without wasting shield or getting shot in the back, because if he has to touch point, then he can't put his shield this way to protect himself from your Hanzo and put his shield this way to protect himself from the rest of everybody. So they have to bubble him so he doesn't get crossfired. And if they use bubble, then your Reinhardt can potentially go for a pin with your bubble if you don't waste the bubble just looking for energy for your Zarya. So that's one thing that I generally want your Reinhardt to keep track of is bubbles, because the bubbles enable him the most. Like if he knows if they have bubbles or not, then he can make more pin plays. And just make sure you set up your pin as short as possible by trying to go set up a pin this way on the Reinhardt. Potentially just take an extra second to go just a little bit further so that you pin him over here instead of over here, because then you pin him into the enemy team and then you're in the middle of the enemy team and you'll just die. Just let your team know if you're going for a sort of pin like that. But yeah, that's another one of the ways you can get a pick with this comp, is just put enough pressure on the Reinhardt as he tries to touch point, and you can kill him with your pin if he doesn't have bubble and you have bubble. If you play this against Winston D.Va double sniper, then you generally want to be a bit more passive about your crossfire sightlines, and you just generally want to be more careful, because you don't necessarily even have to take duels with their snipers or take favorable positioning. You can just position behind your shield and just take space with your shield, because they only have 2 snipers to break your shield, which isn't that impressive, and is Zenyatta. And the Winston D.Va really aren't going to do that much to your shield if you're playing Reinhardt into it. So you can just take some space and give your snipers some nice sight lines in all sorts of different ways, by either going up there and then they just have free shots on whoever. Like since they're running Winston D.Va, you can focus the tanks even more than you normally would, because shooting shields isn't really that effective with double snipers, since they aren't the fastest shield break comp. So if you have the option to not shoot shields, then you generally want to shoot things, obviously. So against Winston D.Va, you can put a bunch of pressure on the tanks, and it'll either make the supports potentially miss position, so you can get a shot on them, or it'll force the Winston and D.Va back, which will take a lot of pressure off of your snipers, because then they can't just drop on your snipers or do anything annoying like that. And if they can't jump on you, then or drop on you, then you're just free to touch point. So for instance, if they push the Winston and the D.Va back so that they can't just drop on your Reinhardt and your Zarya, then your Reinhardt and Zarya can touch like right here. And if they're like, if you've used your shield to properly clear out the upper area, so their Widow or Hanzo can't just chill up there, then they can't crossfire you, because they have to chill back there somewhere. You can also, bubble your Hanzo to go up there and push their Hanzo or someone away from there, and then he can always retreat to his team. And the shield, if you're standing right here, if you're facing Winston D.Va. But yeah, you just want to focus the Winston and the D.Va more, because you have it just opens up so much space, because if their tanks are pushed back, then they can't be as controlling, like forcing your team to play different ways. So it lets your team do all sorts of different things. But if you're playing against Orisa D.Va, then you might as well just switch comps, because Orisa D.Va is pretty good against double sniper Rein Zarya, because the Rein Zarya can't do anything to Orisa D.Va on the high ground. Your Zarya will never get charged, and your Rein is just going to be standing here, not shielding anything particularly. And if you send your Rein on high ground and try to win a shield war, then winning shield wars is very slow and not generally the best way to win. Like, the reason you don't want to just fight a shield war is because if the Orisa positions her shield correctly and just puts a shield down, and then, oh, her shield is breaking, she's going to lose the shield war, then her team just retreats to cover, and your breaking of the shield does literally nothing. So yeah, you can swap to full dive, because full dive can avoid the double sniper sightlines versus Orisa D.Va, because they don't have anything to pressure. Like a Junkrat for you to jump in, so you can always just jump in. Yeah.